Hi, Jonas here. I'm going to talk a bit about sustainability and utopia. Is sustainability a way to reach utopia? Well, the idea of the concept of sustainability has a lot to do with time, because something that probably sustains over time is something that goes from the past into the present into the future. So it stays the same over time. And the thing, of course, is that the past and the future are both, if not simply fantasies, but at least they are not present. So when we go through life, we kind of want to try to learn from the past and use those lessons to reach an as good future as possible, since there are several alternative futures. And these alternative futures could be either good, which is what we want to, where we want to reach, which could be kind of called utopia. And we want to avoid the bad futures, the dystopias. This is an idea that is usually applied to the idea of resources. We shouldn't use more resources in the world that the earth can sustain. But this kind of loop thinking is somewhat strange when applied to human beings. It can almost lead to an idea of social preservation, that over time we would be kind of stuck in a loop from birth to death, and not being able to reach an alternative future, and simply stay the same and not evolve. Which originates from a few ideas, I think. One effect, at least, is that we need to start off from one certain reality, and we want this, and the consequence is that this one certain reality can only lead to one possible future, since we are more or less staying the same. So this could be the effect of sustainability being applied to human beings. And we need the alternative futures, not least for a kind of a sense of hope, I would say, to keep the future open. Another effect is that one perceived reality give birth to a certain set of problems and its solutions, because we would like to aspire to a certain future, but if the perceived reality is kind of closed in and given, there are only certain problems and solutions that are valid, and thereby the aspired future is closing in and pre-handedly decided. So between the perceived current reality and the future or the futures, we need alternative realities to keep the future open. We could call them heterotopias, which I borrow from the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who who suggests that the heterotopia is another place, like a graveyard, for example, which is different from the ordinary reality we kind of live in, because when we enter a graveyard, we tend to move differently, we talk differently, we become more quiet. He thought of the boat as a heterotopia par excellence, where a world in itself that can separate from other places. And also he gives an example of the brothel, for example, which is also a different place. These other places are kind of excluded if we get a closed-in reality, a reality which is given once and for all. So you could argue that a monoculture utopia is a potential dystopia. And there is a certain kind of part of the idea of sustainability is, I think, difficult to separate from the idea of globalization, which is more or less kind of since if we are going to attack and solve many of the problems we are facing, we need to do this on a global scale. But at the same time, there is some kind of something gloomy about this, where is this a way towards a monoculture, where we simply need to understand the world in one certain way, and this produces a certain set of problems and its solutions, and anything beside it is not valid, not considered valid. It's worth thinking about. I think that that's somewhat important to separate the idea of sustainability in the world of resources versus in the world of humans. Foucault suggested this quote, and I think it sums it up very neatly. In civilizations without boats, dreams dry up, espionage takes the place of adventure, and the police take the place of pirates. In a film from a few years ago called Pleasantville, they kind of use this idea that we can live, that a pleasant world isn't necessarily a beautiful world, kind of thing. It's about society in the 50s, where people are always nice towards each other and pleasant, but there is no color. So two kids from the present are drawn into this old society of Pleasantville, and well, plenty of things happen, but all of a sudden they start to get color in this world. Let's just watch this trailer.
There's a place where life is simple. People are perfect. And everything is black and white.
Honey, I'm home.
It's a place that's as far from reality as we can imagine.
How about some marshmallow rice squares?
Those are swell.
But maybe it's a lot closer
Let me see that.
than we think.
What happened?
I'm not sure.
Look at me. I'm pasty.
Morning, kids. Better get a move on or you'll be late for school.
I put blueberries in them just the way you like.
We're in Pleasantville?
No!
We're supposed to be in school.
We're supposed to be in color?
What's all the commotion?
Who's that?
I didn't think you'd want to come here until we'd been pinned for a little while.
You can pin me anytime you want to. Or maybe I should just pin you.
She's a fine young woman. She would never do anything for us to be concerned about.
From the creator of Big and Dave,
What are you doing to these people? You can't do this to them. You're messing with their whole universe.
Maybe it needs to be messed with, David.
comes a story about the loss of innocence.
I brought you something from the library.
Gee whiz.
And the power of change.
Well, what's outside of Pleasantville?
There's some places where the road keeps going.
You shouldn't cover that up.
What is that?
What's going on? It's rain. Honey, I'm home.
New Line Cinema presents
Look at my face.
It'll go away.
I don't want it to go away.
Something is happening to our town.
Jeff Daniels, William H. Macy, Joan Allen, Reese Witherspoon, and Tobey Maguire.
So what's going to happen now?
I don't know.
Pleasantville.
What are we gonna do, Bob? Well, we're safe for now. Thank goodness we're in a bowling alley.
Isn't it kind of interesting that they put innocence and change as opposites? This is a totally different movie, of course. It's Blade Runner. You've probably seen it before, so we're just going to watch a short clip. But this is dystopia. Well, here it is.
I need your deck. This is a bad one, the worst yet. There was an escape from the off-world colonies 2 weeks ago. 6 replicants, 3 male, 3 female. They slaughtered 20.
A Blade Runner's job is to hunt down replicants. Manufactured humans you can't tell from the real thing.
What's this? Roy Batty, probably the leader.
There was just one outfit making replicants that superhuman. The Tyrell Corporation.
Well, the fascinating thing I think here is that if you compare these two clips, we see that to find innocence, they need to go back into time, into the past. And to arrive at a dystopia, we need to go into the future. As if dystopias hasn't been around before in the past, which we all know they have. And as if innocence can never be acquired again in the future. So when we dream about the future and these possible utopias, the possible alternative futures, I was curious to find out a bit about what kind of dreams have there been in history and contemporary as well. So I kind of just looked up myths and legends and other real places, more kind of heterotopias, simply online, looked them up and see what are they aspiring for. So I thought I'd just go through them fairly quickly. For example, there is something called Agartha, which is from a novel from 1886. where this place, Agartha, is a land of advanced races in the middle of Earth. So we live kind of on the outer shell of Earth, and inside there's another world called Agartha. In this place, they have an ideal climate because they have a central sun there, which is, I suppose, more stable, and it doesn't rotate in there, so it's more mild all the time, constant, I would imagine. They have an advanced technology, and they have plenty of wisdom and health. Another utopia is Atlantis, which is much older, and they are all related to one another, I would imagine, in one way or another. But this is part of a story from Plato from 320 BC, which is about a continent in the Atlantic, where they also are technologically advanced and part of a large Atlantean empire. The very word utopia is from the 16th century, when Thomas More wrote his book Utopia, which also is an island somewhere. And this was more or less, it's considered to be a parody of England. And he wrote that in this particular place, the Utopia, they have population control. They have no private ownership, no crime, no lawyers, free hospitals, and divorce is permitted. So more or less a mirroring of the society in England. But better, obviously. There was an old story about Avalon, where with Avalon was an island. It's apparently it's called. The meaning is that the Apple Island was part of King Arthur's kingdom, and King Arthur lived in Camelot, and he was a good and fair king. And with his fellow knights, they sat around a round table, so they were honorably egalitarian. But this island, Avalon, it was a place where things and food are produced by themselves. Man doesn't have to do anything. You can go there and just pick it. El Dorado was a story that came about from the conquistadors in Spain, went to South America, and was attracted, as we know, by the idea of plenty of gold. And in the city of El Dorado, there were so much gold that you can acquire your wealth very easily and rapidly. Hyperborea is a Greek mythology, which is a land in the north where the sun keeps shining 24 hours a day. There is music all day long. No disease, no aging, no labor, no war. Cocaine, or I'm not sure how that would be pronounced. Cocaine, I don't know. Anyway, it's a medieval story. And I'm going to read something I found. This was a medieval mythical land of plenty, extreme luxury, sexual liberty, roasted pigs wander about with knives in their backs to make carving easy, where grilled geese fly directly into one's mouth, where cooked fish jump out of the water and land at one's feet. The weather is always mild, the wine flows freely, sex is readily available, and all people enjoy eternal youth. Asgård, or Asgard, is a Norse mythology which consists of a very fertile land, more fertile than others, and there is a great abundance of gold and jewels. Which, by the way, is interesting, because if you have great abundance or a fertile land, why do you need a great abundance of gold and jewels? It suggests that you're not going to use the gold and jewels to buy stuff, but rather for the beauty of them. Shambhala is from the Buddhist tradition, but it's quite different in the sense that it's rather a place of peace, tranquility, and happiness. And it is considered to be a both physical and mental place. So you can reach there in your mind as well as going there in person. Shambhala could be related to Shangri-La. They sound a lot the same, and Shangri-La is a place that is considered to be located in Tibet, which is also a place of abundance, health, and youth. Xanadu is actually a real place, so to speak, a physical place. I always hesitate to differ that strongly between a real place and a non-real place, because Shangri-La may very well be just as real, although it's mostly mental. But Xanadu was, or Shangdu, located in 13th century China. Marco Polo went there, and he described this place as a wonderful, extraordinary, powerful place. So it is mostly a place of earthly power and splendor. There was a marble palace and exquisite art, he writes. And of course, very central to most of Earth's religions is heaven, which is a higher place, up in the clouds or up somewhere, or perhaps a future heaven on Earth, or a place for rebirth. But what they have in common is that that suffering is gone. The kind of pains and difficulties we endure here on Earth is gone in heaven. And instead we have a lot of brightness, and gold and music, angels and beauty. So these dreams could be seen as heterotopias. They offer a different version of the future and what is possible. And I just took these examples and tried to list what they are suggesting, and they obviously are they are a mirroring of the perceived reality the people are living in, and the problems and the solutions that they see. So most of these stories are mostly materialistic. They are a lot about food, power, peace, beauty, and they are free, warm, and some of them about technology. But it's mostly kind of a physical place, a place of things. And considering that in the past many people lived in a perceived reality of scarcity, so they dreamed about having great abundance of food and different kinds of freedoms. But also locked into hierarchies and power, kings, monarchies, and so forth. So if you compare these with contemporary stories in the political stories, I took these two parties here in Sweden, the two big parties, which are the Social Democratic Party and the New Moderate Party. The Social Democratic Party leaning to the left and the New Moderate Party leaning to the right. So I looked into their programs, the idea programs that they suggest, and I took a piece of text and I'm going to read it to you now. And this is from the Social Democratic Party. Freedom and equality are a matter both of individual rights as well as of collective solutions, in order to create the best for all, which provides the basis for individuals' opportunities in life. The human being is a social creature who develops and grows in cooperation with other people, and much of what is important to the welfare of the individual can only be created together with other people. So they are painting a picture, a much more social world. The world they seem to perceive is very social, compared to the mostly materialistic world, which is it has little to do with other people. Some in Utopia, for example, no doubt, but very much about resources. And here they are talking about something more social, and that freedom and equality is something that we can create together. And there is no the individual opportunities is not only compatible but dependent upon on the collective and other people. The New Moderate Party is also talking about the social, but somewhat differently. They put it like this. A successful society rests on people who build the society. Everyone who goes to work, all of those who use their freedom to take responsibility for themselves and others. It is each individual's possibility and will to use their capability to work, which decides the strength of the society. So this is a more of a less something to aspire to, but rather something we can put on the shoulders of people, those who build the society. These are two different versions, obviously, and that's why they are two different political parties. But what's interesting, I think, is that this focus upon our own and the human being's own responsibility or possibility to create the utopia right here, right now, through our own capabilities. And I'm going to finish with this clip from a guy called, what's his name again? Michio Kaku. He's well known. I'm sure you recognize him. He's talking about still how we feed the dream of a utopia through technology, which perhaps over the last years or so have been considered more of a dystopia. But the thing is that there is a possibility through technology to create something else. So, well, that's it. I hope this will be food for thought and fuel our discussions and conversation. So I'm gonna thank you for listening and leave you with this interesting clip by Michio Kaku.
Throughout human history, people have tried to create utopia, the perfect society. In fact, America, the American dream in some sense, was based on utopianism. Why do we have the Shaker movement? Why did we have the Quakers? Why did we have so many different kinds of religious movements that fled Europe looking to create a utopia here in the Americas? Well, we know the Shakers have disappeared, and many of these colonies have also disappeared, only to be found in footnotes in American textbooks. And the question is why? One reason why is scarcity. Because back then, the Industrial Revolution was still young, and societies had scarcity. Scarcity creates conflict. And unless you have a way to resolve conflict, your colony falls apart. How do you allocate resources? Who gets access to food when there's a famine? Who gets shelter when there's a snowstorm and all of a sudden you've eaten up your seed corn? These are questions that face the early American colonists, and that's the reason why we only see the ghost towns of these utopias. However, now we have nanotechnology. And with nanotechnology, perhaps, who knows, maybe in 100 years, we'll have something called the replicator. Now, the replicator is something you see in Star Trek. It's called the molecular assembler, and it takes ordinary raw materials, breaks them up at the atomic level, and joins the joints in different ways to create new substances. If you have a molecular assembler, you can turn, for example, a glass into wood, or vice versa. You would have the power of a magician. In fact, the power of a god. The ability to literally transform the atoms of one substance into another. And we see it on Star Trek. It's also the most subversive device of all, because if utopias fail because of scarcity, then what happens when you have infinite abundance? What happens when you simply ask and it comes to you? One of my favorite episodes on Star Trek is when the Enterprise encounters a space capsule left over from the 20th century, the bad 20th century. People died of all these horrible diseases, and many people froze themselves knowing that in the 23rd century or so, they'll be thawed out and their diseases will be cured. Well, sure enough, it's the 23rd century now. The Enterprise finds a space capsule and begins to revive all these people and cure them of cancer, cure them of incurable genetic diseases. And then one of these individuals, however, was a banker. He's revived, and he says to himself, my God, my gamble worked. I'm alive. I'm in the 23rd century. And he said, call my stockbroker. Call my banker. I am rich. I am rich. My investments, they've been sitting there in the bank for centuries. I must be a quadrillionaire. And then the crew of the Enterprise looks at this man and says, what is money? What is a bank? What is a stockbroker? We don't have any of these in the 23rd century. And then they say, if you want something, you simply ask for it, and you get it. Now, that's subversive. That's revolutionary. Because if all utopian societies vanish because of scarcity and conflict, what happens when there is no scarcity? What happens when you simply ask and you get what you want? This has enormous philosophical implications. For example, why bother to work? Why bother to go to work when you simply ask for things and it comes to you? Now, some sociologists think that if drugs, for example, are totally legalized, absolutely legalized, then maybe 3 to 5% of the human race will become permanent drug addicts. That's the price for total legalization of drugs. I don't know, but that's a number that people talk about. What happens when we have this society based on replicators? Then will we have 3 to 5% of the human race become permanent parasites? This is a possibility. The whole nature of the human psyche is based around producing things, doing something, making a contribution. What happens when you don't have to do that anymore? What happens when there's infinite plenty? What happens if there is a utopia? The detractors will say, bah, humbug. There is no replicator. It violates the laws of physics. Well, actually, that's not true. There actually is a nanobot that can replicate, actually take apart molecules and rearrange them in fantastic ways. Mother Nature has already created it. It's called the ribosome. The ribosome can take hamburgers, milkshakes, and turn them into a baby in 9 months. That is a miracle. The ribosome takes hamburgers, French fries, potato chips, breaks apart the molecules, and reassembles them into DNA. Mother Nature has created the replicator. It replicates humans. But what happens when humans create replicators by which we can replicate everything? This is a very subversive idea.